My brother blames me for his failures and tells everyone. Despite making his own choices, my brother tells the family that his lack of success is because I didn't support him enough. Now, I'm painted as the villain. I always believed that family was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where you could count on unconditional love and support, no matter what. My name is Elena. I'm 28, and I work as a marketing professional at a mid-sized agency downtown. I've built my life around creativity, hard work, and a fiercely independent spirit. I have a supportive partner, Luke, who always stands by me, and a close circle of friends who value honesty above all. But no matter how much I cherished my family, there was one person who cast a long shadow over everything: my older brother, Damien. Growing up, Damien was always the golden child, or so everyone said. He had charm, confidence, and an uncanny ability to get by with a smile. Yet, over the years, I began to see cracks in that facade. Despite making his own choices, Damien increasingly started blaming me for his failures. At family gatherings, his tone would shift from jovial banter to venomous accusations. I still remember one cold winter morning when, over a hurried breakfast at our parents' house, he murmured under his breath, "You never supported me enough," as if I were the cause of his misfortunes. At the time, I brushed it off, assuming he was just having a bad day. But those words began to echo in my mind long after that morning had passed. I tried to be the reliable, caring sister, always ready with advice, always the one to lend an ear. I'd helped him with everything from job applications to personal dilemmas, even when his decisions were clearly his own. Yet, as the years went by, the blame started piling up. Damien began telling everyone, relatives, friends, even coworkers, that his lack of success was entirely because I hadn't been there for him. I would hear whispers at family dinners and see skeptical looks when I entered a room. What stunned most was that it wasn't just a private grievance. His accusations were public, and soon I found myself painted as the villain in a narrative that wasn't mine to own. One breezy Saturday morning, while I was sipping coffee on my apartment's small balcony and watching the city come alive, I received a text from Luke. His message was simple, but laced with worry. "Elena, have you noticed what Damien's been saying at the office? People are starting to believe his story." I felt my stomach drop. I knew deep down that Damien's issues were his own, but the fact that he was publicly blaming me for his failures was tearing at my sense of self-worth. I remembered all the times I had been there for him, all the sacrifices I'd made, only to be accused of not caring enough. That day, as I replayed his harsh words in my mind, I realized I had to reclaim my story. I couldn't let a narrative built on lies define who I was. In that quiet moment of introspection, a mix of sorrow and steely determination welled up inside me. I resolved that I would not be the scapegoat for my brother's shortcomings any longer. I would gather the truth, confront him, and restore my reputation. Little did I know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would force our entire family to confront uncomfortable truths and ultimately force Damien to face his own demons. The first signs of the brewing storm came at our annual family reunion last fall. I arrived early, hopeful that a change of scenery might bring some respite from the mounting tension. The house was abuzz with cheerful greetings and the aroma of my mother's famous roast filling every room. I made small talk with cousins and uncles, all the while trying to push aside the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. As the day progressed, I began to notice subtle changes. While I chatted with a group of relatives in the garden, I overheard a conversation that sent a chill down my spine. One of my cousins, with an edge in her voice, said, "I heard Damien's been saying that Elena never really supported him, that she's the reason he can't succeed." The words, though whispered, felt like a public trial. I forced a smile, trying to pretend I hadn't heard, but inside, my heart pounded with hurt and disbelief. That evening, during a quiet dinner, the tension grew palpable. Every time Damien was mentioned, there was a heavy silence. I tried to focus on my meal, but every glance around the table confirmed my worst fears. Some family members were buying into his narrative. Later, in a hushed conversation in the kitchen, my aunt remarked, "Sometimes I wonder if Elena really understands what it means to support family. Damien's always been so disappointed." I felt as if the knife had been plunged into my back. My efforts, my sacrifices, all being dismissed and twisted into a story that wasn't mine. Unable to bear the mounting whispers any longer, I retreated to my room that night. I opened my journal and began to record every detail of the day. The offhand comments, the reluctant glances, and the cold indifference in some voices that I'd always considered family. Each word I wrote was a mix of sorrow and resolve, a silent promise to find the truth behind Damien's accusations. I wondered how far the rumor had spread and what motivated him to cast me in such a negative light. Had he always harbored resentment? Or was this a desperate attempt to deflect his own failures? The more I wrote, the more determined I became to expose the truth. As weeks turned into months, the rumor not only persisted, it grew. Damien began using every opportunity to publicly blame me for his setbacks. At one family dinner, while everyone exchanged pleasantries, he launched into a tirade, loudly proclaiming, "I've failed time and again because I never had the support I needed from Elena." The room fell silent. I sat frozen, trying to process the sheer brazenness of his words. Some relatives exchanged uneasy glances, while others looked on as if I were somehow at fault. My heart ached as I realized that his narrative was not just an offhand grudge. It was a carefully constructed story that was now poisoning every family interaction. Outside of family events, the impact seeped into my everyday life. At work, colleagues who once admired my creativity began to whisper about how Elena always seemed so perfect, but maybe she's hiding something. I noticed that my ideas were being met with subtle skepticism, as if my reputation at home had somehow tainted my professional image. Even on social media, I saw snide comments and insinuations that I was the reason Damien couldn't achieve success. The public nature of these rumors was isolating and soul-crushing. I felt as though I was living in a constant state of judgment, with every person I met viewing me through the lens of Damien's bitter accusations. I sought refuge in one-on-one conversations with close friends. One afternoon, over a cup of steaming coffee at a local cafe, I confided in my longtime friend, Rachel. "I'm starting to feel like I'm being painted as the villain," I admitted, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Rachel's eyes were full of sympathy as she replied, "Elena, you know deep down that you've always been there for your brother. These are his failures, not yours." Her words offered a sliver of comfort, yet the damage was done. I realized that if I didn't act soon, the lies would continue to grow, further fracturing the family and tarnishing my hard-earned reputation. Determined to understand Damien's motivations, I began discreetly gathering evidence. I reached out to a few relatives, asking subtle questions about his recent behavior and his version of events. I discovered that, in many instances, his failures were the result of his own poor decisions, bad investments, missed opportunities, and reckless choices that he had conveniently blamed on me. The more I uncovered, the more I was convinced that Damien was deflecting responsibility. Every piece of evidence bolstered my resolve to confront him and clear my name once and for all. That night, as I sat by my desk in the dim glow of my desk lamp, I penned a series of reflective entries in my journal. I detailed every hurtful comment, every accusing look, and every instance where I'd been blamed unjustly. The pages filled with raw emotion, and with each word I vowed that I would not be a scapegoat any longer. I knew that the time had come to plan a confrontation, It's a decisive moment when I would force Damien to face the truth and compel our family to acknowledge that his failures were his own. I spent the next several weeks meticulously planning my next steps. I began reaching out to relatives who I knew would see the truth. Those who had always been close to me and who had expressed doubts about Damien's version of events. In hushed, earnest conversations at coffee shops, I gathered allies, sharing my side of the story and the evidence I had collected. Their support was both comforting and galvanizing. It reassured me that I wasn't alone in this struggle. One chilly evening, I organized a small gathering at my apartment with a few of these trusted family members, over cups of hot cocoa and soft background music. I laid out the timeline of Damien's accusations, the hurtful rumors, and the undeniable evidence that pointed to his own poor choices. Every detail was presented with clarity and conviction. I asked them directly, "Do you truly believe that my lack of support is the reason for his failures?" Their responses were unanimous. Damien's shortcomings were his own, and I was not to blame. Buoyed by this support, I decided that the next major family event would be the perfect stage for a final confrontation. I chose our annual Thanksgiving dinner, a time when the entire extended family gathered in one place, where silence would no longer be an option. I prepared myself mentally, rehearsing my words and steeling my resolve. I knew the risks. Confronting Damien publicly could shatter long-held bonds and forever alter family dynamics. But I also knew that I could not let these false narratives continue to define me. Every day leading up to Thanksgiving, I refined my argument, drafting a speech that was equal parts personal testimony and impassioned plea for truth. I remembered moments from my childhood when Damien's actions had been misinterpreted, when his pride had led him to shift blame onto me. I wove these memories into my speech, not to attack him, but to expose the pattern of deflection that had plagued our relationship for years. As Thanksgiving approached, the tension in the air was almost tangible. I received terse texts from Damien, filled with thinly veiled hostility whenever I casually mentioned the dinner. It was clear that he sensed the impending confrontation. I took solace in the small acts of kindness from supportive family members and in quiet moments with Luke, who reminded me that standing up for myself was the only path to healing. In those moments of solitude, I felt both the weight of the past and the promise of a future where I could finally reclaim my identity. The day before Thanksgiving, I reviewed my speech one final time, feeling the power of every word I had chosen. I knew that when I stepped up to speak, there would be no turning back, only the chance to set the record straight and to ensure that my story, my truth, would no longer be overshadowed by Damien's bitter lies. Thanksgiving arrived with a mix of crisp autumn air and an underlying electricity that I could almost taste. Our family home, usually filled with the aroma of roasted turkey and the sound of laughter, was now a battleground of unspoken tension. As relatives gathered around the long, polished dining table, I could sense that everyone was bracing for something. Damien had been unusually quiet all day, his gaze dark and distant, as if he knew that the time for his carefully constructed narrative was running out. The dinner started, as always, with polite conversation and forced smiles. But as the meal progressed, the conversation turned, and Damien, unable to contain himself any longer, launched into a tirade. "I've always failed because I never got the support I needed," he declared, his voice rising above the clinking of cutlery. "It's all Elena's fault." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me, and I felt as if the entire weight of my family's judgment was upon my shoulders. My heart pounded as I struggled to find words. For years, I had endured his quiet insinuations, but now he was making a spectacle of it. In that charged moment, I rose from my seat and cleared my throat. "Damien, stop," I said, my voice firm yet trembling with emotion. "This isn't about me. It's about the choices you've made." My words hung in the air like a challenge. I recounted with painful clarity the times I had supported him, offering advice, lending an ear, even sacrificing my own comfort, only to have him twist those acts of love into evidence of my supposed neglect. I spoke about the truth that every failure you've experienced is your own, and that blaming me is a way to avoid responsibility. The confrontation escalated quickly. Some relatives began to murmur in support of me, while others looked on with expressions of shock and disbelief. Damien's face contorted with anger and hurt. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to defend himself. "I needed you, and you were never there." The accusations stung, but I knew that deep down his failures were the result of his own reckless choices, not my absence. As the dinner devolved into chaos, I could feel the eyes of our extended family weighing me down. The tension was almost unbearable, a mix of betrayal, anger, and the raw pain of being unfairly blamed. In that moment, I realized that the family's trust in Damien's narrative was crumbling, and that the truth was beginning to surface. I stood there, heart in my throat, determined that I would no longer let his lies define me. The silence that followed my words was heavy with the promise of change, a promise that I had finally taken the first step toward reclaiming my dignity. After dinner, the atmosphere grew even more charged. I retreated to a quiet room where a few supportive relatives gathered with me. We spoke in hushed tones about the events that had just unfolded. One of my cousins, Mariah, looked me in the eye and said, "Elena, you've always been the one with the strength today. You showed us what true integrity looks like." Her words, filled with admiration, bolstered my resolve. I knew that this confrontation was only the beginning of a long battle, but it was a battle I was finally ready to fight. I then sought out Damien in the hallway, where the tension was palpable. "Damien," I said quietly, "we need to talk, alone." With a reluctant nod, he followed me into an empty study. The room was small and dimly lit, a stark contrast to the public chaos we'd just left behind. I took a deep breath and began, "For years, I've tried to support you. I've always been there, even when you pushed me away with your anger. But blaming me for your failures isn't fair. It's a way of hiding your own mistakes." My voice wavered, but I pressed on. I recounted specific instances, times when he had refused to take responsibility, when he had squandered opportunities, that clearly showed that his problems were self-inflicted. Damien's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw vulnerability in his expression. I just felt so alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought if you were more supportive, maybe I wouldn't have failed." His confession, raw and unguarded, was heartbreaking, but I couldn't let sympathy cloud the truth. "Damien," I replied, "your failures are your own. I can't be the scapegoat for your choices. I'm not responsible for what you decide to do." The words, harsh but honest, resonated in the small room. Our conversation was a torrent of emotions, anger, regret, and a desperate need for understanding. Though it was painful, it was also liberating. I realized that in confronting him, I was reclaiming not just my reputation, but my identity. The conversation reached a turning point when Damien finally admitted that he had been using me as a shield to deflect from his own shortcomings. "Maybe I did blame you too much," he said, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Elena. I never meant to hurt you." His apology, though tentative, was a crack in the wall of bitterness that had built up between us. I told him that forgiveness would take time, but that I was willing to try if he committed to taking responsibility for his own life. In that moment, I sensed a fragile possibility of reconciliation. One that, while not erasing the past, allow us both to grow beyond our roles as villain and victim. The confrontation with Damien left an indelible mark on me. In the days that followed, I felt a complex mix of relief, sorrow, and empowerment. I poured my emotions into my work, channeling the pain of the past months into a series of bold, apologetic designs for a major campaign at work. My ideas, once muted by self-doubt, now burst forth with renewed vigor. The transformation was palpable, and soon my colleagues began to notice the change. I received praise not only for my creativity, but also for the authenticity that now shone through every project I touched. Outside of work, the family slowly began to shift as well. At subsequent gatherings, the atmosphere was no longer dominated by Damien's blame, but by honest conversations and subtle apologies. I started receiving quiet words of support from relatives who admitted they had once been swayed by his narrative. "I always thought you were the one who let him down," one uncle confessed one evening, "but now I see things differently." Such moments, small as they were, reaffirmed my belief that truth and self-respect could ultimately mend even the deepest of familial wounds. One night, as I sat on my porch with Luke, watching the city lights shimmer in the dark, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. Every painful word, every accusing glance had been a stepping stone toward reclaiming my dignity. I realized that while Damien's narrative had once threatened to destroy my reputation, it had also forced me to confront my own inner strength. I no longer felt defined by his failures or by the blame he had so carelessly thrown my way. I was, and always had been, the master of my own destiny. I decided then to document my journey, a blog post that detailed every twist and turn, every moment of despair and triumph. I wanted the world to know that standing up for oneself isn't just an act of defiance. It's a declaration of the right to be seen, heard, and respected. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers and friends alike, each one echoing the same sentiment that true strength comes from owning one's truth in sharing my story. I found not only healing, but also a newfound community of people who had faced similar battles. Damien, for his part, began a slow process of introspection. Though our relationship would never be as it once was, he started to acknowledge his own role in the family's dysfunction. At one small family dinner, months later, he quietly told me, "I'm working on it, Elena. I know I've hurt you, and I'm trying to change." His words didn't erase the past, but they signaled a tentative new beginning. A promise that perhaps with time, our family might heal in the aftermath of that fateful Thanksgiving and the subsequent public confrontation. Our family dynamics began to shift in unexpected ways. The hurt and division that had once defined our gatherings gradually gave way to an atmosphere of cautious honesty. Relatives who had once echoed Damien's bitter accusations now started to question their validity, and many reached out to me with heartfelt apologies for having doubted me. At work, my newfound confidence translated into professional success. The campaign I poured my soul into became one of the agency's most celebrated projects. My ideas were recognized as bold and innovative, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences about the importance of authenticity in marketing. Each public accolade was a small victory, a declaration that my worth was defined by my creativity and resilience, not by a misplaced blame. I also began channeling the entire ordeal into a creative project of my own. I started a blog titled Own Your Truth, where I shared personal stories of overcoming blame and reclaiming identity. The response was overwhelming. Readers from all walks of life wrote in with their own stories of being unfairly blamed and of fighting back against injustice. It became clear that my pain was not isolated. Many had faced similar battles, and my story resonated deeply. In writing, I found healing, and in healing, I found purpose. Luke remained my constant anchor throughout the tumult, his quiet strength and unwavering support gave me the courage to keep moving forward even when the past threatened to drag me down. Together, we spent many evenings discussing the lessons learned and the importance of never allowing anyone to define our worth. Our late-night walks became a ritual. A time to reflect on how far I had come and how the scars of the past had transformed into badges of honor. One crisp autumn afternoon, several months after the confrontation, I attended a small family reunion with a mix of trepidation and hope. The air was lighter, the conversations gentler. I noticed that Damien no longer launched into bitter diatribes. Instead, he listened, sometimes even offering a tentative smile when someone mentioned my name. There were still whispers here and there, but the overall tone had shifted from accusatory to reflective. At one point, an aunt told me quietly, "Elena, you've shown us all what it means to stand up for yourself. I'm proud of you." Those words, simple and sincere, filled me with a quiet sense of vindication. As I sat on my front porch one evening, watching the sun set behind the distant city skyline, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The painful months of false blame, public humiliation, and soul-searching had transformed me. I was no longer the scapegoat, no longer the villain in someone else's story. I had reclaimed my truth and redefined my identity on my own terms. The scars remained, a reminder of the battles fought and the lessons learned. But they were now symbols of my strength, resilience, and unyielding commitment to living authentically. I realized that while family dynamics can be complex and sometimes destructive, the power to shape your own narrative ultimately lies within you. My brother's attempts to blame me for his failures had inadvertently become the catalyst for my own growth. I learned that true justice isn't about seeking revenge. It's about standing up for yourself, even when it means challenging those you love. In reclaiming my voice, I had also opened the door to healing and reconciliation, not just for me, but for our entire family. Now, as I prepare for another day at work, another gathering with friends, and the endless possibilities that lie ahead, I do so with a deep sense of empowerment. I know that my choices, my style, and my creative spirit are mine alone. I have learned that while life may throw accusations and blame your way, you have the strength to rise above and to find your own path. And so, with gratitude for the painful journey that taught me so much, and hope for a future built on truth and authenticity, I step forward, undaunted, unapologetic, and entirely myself. This is not the end of my story. It is merely the beginning of a new chapter where I am the author of my destiny. I now know that when you stand up for yourself, you not only reclaim your identity, but also inspire others to do the same. And that, to me, is the greatest victory of all.